that in the United States, very early on, different state governors saw that local police forces were getting a little too exuberant with their crackdowns on churches, on small business people. I remember in particular one case in Texas of a hair salon owner so desperate that her company would be destroyed by the lockdown. She opened in defiance of the law. The governor saw that, stayed the prosecution of her case, and in fact, in states like Florida and Texas, there was a blanket amnesty, a stay of all prosecutions, and a vacating of any fines or other punishments. Basically, those governors said, we're not going to punish people, and any little official, any cop, any local busybody who's going to try and chase someone down, I'm just in advance pardoning them. That put a stop to it because they wanted to put a stop to it. And I refer to pretty much every single jurisdiction in Canada where tickets that were issued up to 2 years ago are still making their way through the courts, with police coming as witnesses, with government lawyers as prosecutors, with government judges judging them. There's no end to them. And even though some of them have aged out, I mean, typically if you're charged with an offense and you're not prosecuted within 2 years, the charter says that you didn't have a speedy trial. There have been cases where violent criminals have had the case against them stayed for want of prosecution. I haven't heard much of that in Canada. And one of the worst cases is in the province that claims as its motto, strong and free. I'm talking about the province of Alberta, where some of the most brutal lockdowns and persecutions of the lockdowns has happened. A church in northern Alberta was prosecuted and was in court very recently for not causing COVID, not failing an inspection, but rather for asking the health inspectors to come back just not at the exact moment when the church was in service. Joining us to tell the story and what the judge said is our friend and chief reporter, Sheila Gunn Reid, who joins us now from Edmonton. Sheila, great to see you again. You were at the trial of Church in the Vine. The trial is actually over. They were convicted. You were at the sentencing hearing for a church. You don't hear those words very often. Tell us what it was like.
Well, it's bizarre because, as you say, you don't experience this, and you never would think that you would experience this, particularly in Alberta. But Church in the Vine, yesterday morning was their sentencing hearing. They were previously convicted. The church as an entity and the pastor, Pastor Tracy Fortin, were convicted of 3 counts of obstructing a public health officer. Now, that's particularly noteworthy because Church in the Vine has never been accused nor convicted of violating a public health order. They've never been accused of COVID noncompliance. What happened here is the health inspectors and the police, who were part of this hunter-killer task force directed at churches, they would come week after week and barge into the church and interrupt the church while the little ones were in Sunday school, while people were reading their Bibles. At one point, while Pastor Rodney Fortin, Pastor Tracy's husband, was on the pulpit preaching, the health inspector said she tried to talk to him while he was giving services.
Oh my God.
So Pastor Tracy said, this is crazy. You're not coming in here anymore. Now, that she's the nicest, sweetest woman you'll ever meet in your life. Not violent, not rude, not anything like that. But she just said, you can come back, just not while we're preaching. We'll happily take whatever time you need to walk you through all of our processes, but you're not coming in during church services. So week after week, Tracy would sit at the front and turn the health inspector away and say, just come back at a different time. You're not going to run around here like a bunch of lemmings with your clipboards in the Sunday school. It's not happening. For that, they were convicted of 3 counts of obstructing a health officer. And yesterday they were fined $80,000. So church fines plus victim surcharges. Who's the victim here, by the way? The province?
Yeah.
Of a total of $80,000.
You know, I used to be a lawyer. I used to be involved in criminal law matters. Sometimes the criminal code or another law says a punishment of up to, let's say, 2 years in jail or $25,000 fine. And what actually happens in practice, especially for a first offense, is no jail time. And
Yeah.
if there was a $25,000 specified penalty, maybe it's a $500 fine. In fact, it's been a while since I practiced law, but you don't have to be a practicing lawyer to know that for a first offense at anything where there's no violence, where there's no harm or malice, often there is no penalty at all. No penalty
Yeah.
at all. For this judge, at the behest of Jason Kenney's health cops and Jason Kenney's secret prosecutor, I understand from your tweeting that the prosecutor said she didn't want her name spoken in public, like she was some gangland prosecutor. By the way, what is her name?
Her name is Karen Thorsrud, and she's also the one behind the prosecution of James Coates.
Yeah.
So she is also part of this hunter-killer task force directed at Christians, not just the religious community, but moreover, specifically Christians in Alberta. She's the one behind that. So I understand why she doesn't want her name used in open court, but there is no publication ban on her name. It's just for her own comfort. So that's why I'm using her name.
She's such a bigot. I mean, imagine saying, I want to go to law school and I want to join the Justice Department. Why? Do you want to put away bad guys? Do you want to take on murderers and robbers and kidnappers? No, I want to go around Alberta prosecuting Christians. Hey, when you're done your tour of duty in Alberta, I bet you China or Iran or North Korea could hire you for your expertise and your track record to shut down those house churches there, except for I don't think they would have $80,000 penalties for a first offense. That's super gross. Now, James Kitchen is the lawyer who's fighting this. I understand he's going to appeal. Is that right?
Yeah. So James Kitchen has been helping the church in the Vine since the very beginning. They became a democracy fund case. If people want to donate to offset their legal fees, it's at savepastortracy.com, and donations there are tax deductible. But we're not done with this yet because they're appealing the conviction and they're trying to stay the fines in advance of the outcome of that appeal. So they have until the end of August to come up with $80,000 in fines, or the province wants civil enforcement. That means taking their house, taking their car, maybe taking their church building, maybe taking the sound system out of the church. We don't know what civil enforcement will look like, but the province wants their pound of flesh from this church for simply protecting their congregation.
I've never heard of anything so gross. And again, when it comes to civil enforcement, you don't have to be a practicing lawyer to know how gross that is. There's certain exemptions. You can't take away someone's business tools to make a living. Imagine going into a church and they, for all we know, they might seize the church and expropriate it.
Not the first time.
Yeah.
Not the first time.
That's what Jason Kenney did to the Grace Life Church. He turned it into a police outpost and put the latrines right on the steps of the church just to show that he was physically and morally shitting on the church. Sorry to swear. Super gross. I got a question for you. I mean, an $80,000 fine, it's got to be coming close to a record in Canada for a lockdown fine. I mean, I heard rumors that there was a fine out there somewhere that was in six figures, but it's not coming to mind right now. This may well be the biggest fine there is. And it's not to some mega corporation. It's to a church. And it's not for breaking a health order. It's just for telling the little Inspector Stasi to come back when things weren't underway. Was there a single other reporter that you saw
Not
either
one.
covering the trial or reporting about it from long distance? A single other reporter?
Not one. In fact, CBC finally caught up to my reporting when the church was convicted about 10 days later. And they found out from trolling Pastor Tracy's Facebook page. And I think they even published a picture of me that was taken with Church in the Vines, calling me an unidentified woman, even though they know.
They copy your story and then they call you an unidentified woman. They have to say that to cover their tracks, that they were just rewriting your work.
Yeah, but there's no interest from the mainstream media about this story that is really taking on a bit of an international focus, because the outside world, particularly the Americans, they cannot even believe what's happening in Alberta. It's the kind of thing they don't even try to pull in California, and they're doing it in so-called conservative Alberta. Now, we do have a petition at savepastortracy.com. So if you go to savepastortracy.com, you're going to see a bunch of things. You're going to see my coverage, so you can sort of follow along with the plight and the trials and tribulations of this church. You can see our billboard along the side of Highway 2, because I want as many people to know in this province that the persecutions are still going on, even though the lockdown restrictions and Jason Kenney are gone. And you can help fund the legal fees and the appeal for the church. And you can sign our petition at savepastortracy.com. And we're going to do something special with that. Sure, Jason Kenney's gone. He's doing the long goodbye. We are going to hand deliver that petition to all the UCP leadership candidates, because we want a commitment from them that there must be an amnesty on these so-called COVID scofflaws.
Yeah.
They didn't do anything wrong. They didn't hurt anybody.
Yeah.
Nobody was there that didn't want to be there. Why are we trying to ruin these people, if not just to deter anybody from standing up next time?
You know, that is such a great analogy. You use the word amnesty, and I'm familiar with certain terms in law and policy, like a gun amnesty. Happens a lot in the United States. There are certain firearms, and if you give them up to the police, they won't ask any questions. They'll just take the guns, and no questions asked. Sometimes they even pay you for them. There's immigration amnesties. They have that a lot. They've had that in the United States. They talk about having it more where, okay, you came into the country illegally, but you can get on the right track this way and we won't prosecute you. And then there's even tax amnesties. We have those in Canada that you can, if you did some cheating, if you did some tax evasion, you can come to the government and they won't ask too many questions. All sorts of amnesties, and these three things I'm talking about, illegal guns, illegal immigration, tax cheating, are very serious. Imagine an amnesty for those things, but not an amnesty for a church that politely asks a government inspector to come back not right in the middle of the pastor's sermon. Super gross. And that's how I started this interview, is saying true leaders who care about freedom wouldn't let little bully cops or bully prosecutors do this. That they state all the prosecutions immediately. But it's not just that Jason Kenney is letting these police and prosecutors doing this. He assigned them this job.
Yes.
He is encouraging them. I think it's his vengeance. The more I see Jason Kenney deal with these freedom protesters, like with the truckers, he started using Trudeau language about radicals, extremists, hateful. Like he started using Justin Trudeau language. It was super gross. And I think just like Justin Trudeau is really vengeful against people who disagree with him, I sense a whiff of vengeance in the air. It's well into 2022. The lockdowns are gone, but Kenney just wants his pound of flesh from these churches.
Yeah, and I think that this church is exceptionally under the ire of the government, because when the vaccine passports came and when the workplace vaccine mandates came, Pastor Rodney and Pastor Tracy were working 24 hours a day to interview people, to intake people, to do their best to assess their sincerely held religious beliefs and write exemptions for them, so that they could, when these people were abandoned by their own churches,
right,
and forced into a vaccine by their own employer just to pay the bills, they picked up the pieces and they did everything they could to help people to get around the force of the state.
These
That's what this is
churches dared to say our religious belief is that we shouldn't be forced to take these vaccines, and we're going to write a letter to people. No wonder the government hates them so much. I didn't know that part of the story. That shows the true ulterior motives of Jason Kenney's lame duck regime. It's a real problem, I think, that Jason Kenney, although he announced he's quitting, he's still running the show. Aaron O'Toole, the coward who was finally toppled by the truckers, at least he had the good graces to say goodbye immediately. There was an interim leader chosen almost immediately in the form of Candice Bergen. And whatever you have to say about Candice Bergen, you know she's a temporary caretaker leader, and she's not Aaron O'Toole, which is the best thing you can say. Jason Kenney said goodbye, but it was with a giant asterisk, bit of a sneaky, slippery goodbye. And he is still running the show, abusively prosecuting and persecuting these churches. That's super gross.
Yeah. I mean, especially when the reason he is, I think, no longer leader, or he's still leader while he does this sort of waltz out the door months later. The reason he had to resign is because of what he's still doing right now,
I
and that's
believe
the
that.
attacks on the
Yeah.
churches. I think it was good for 15% right off the top. I don't care what your religion is. When you see government officials issuing fines, arresting pastors on rainy streets, barging in with clipboards while people are trying to pray. It doesn't matter what your religion is. It doesn't matter if you're a secular person. Most normal people see that there is no possible way that that can be right and just and appropriate in a free society. And that's why Jason Kenney had to show himself the door.
Yeah. You know, it's funny. You just made me think of all the liberal media and the liberal politicians. They're apoplectic that Quebec has a bill called Bill 24. It's actually law now. And it's the, I don't know if we use this word in English very much, laity or laicity law. That's a archaic way of saying secular law. They have a law in Quebec that if you work in the public service, you cannot have conspicuous religious symbols. And there's some legitimate controversy about that. It's clearly come about because of the face obscuring burqa, which is alien to our Western concept of looking people in the face. That's one of the reasons I hated the masks, is we couldn't see each other's faces. This laicity law in Quebec also bans yarmulkes, Sikh turbans, big conspicuous crosses too, by the way. Now, some people like that law, some people don't. I understand the rationale for it. I don't think I've thought a lot about it, but it is unanimous amongst the fancy people, but that law is atrocious and that it is destroying freedom of people who like to wear big conspicuous religious symbols. And I'm sure it does. All those people, the Venn diagram would be a complete overlap. It would be just two circles right on top of each
Just a
other.
circle.
The people who are appalled by Bill 21 and want to use the charter and we have to stop Bill 21. Every one of them says go harder against these guys churches, crush them, prosecute them, set up a special task force to get the churches. The overlap is complete, Sheila.
Yeah. And, you know, there's really, even as the UCP leadership rolls on, so far I see 3 contenders for the leadership saying this should not have happened. It's Todd Loewen, Danielle Smith, who said this should not have happened, and I will go on an apology tour to try to make this right with Albertans, and Bill Rock. But outside of that, what really should be the overarching issue of the leadership campaign, given that it's the reason that Jason Kenney is no longer going to be leader, you'd think that more people would be talking about it. But it's the mainstream media that drives these conversations in the public, and they love it.
Yeah. Well, very interesting days. Sheila, thanks so much for covering that church case and the other ones that you do. There are many church cases that are still afoot in Alberta. Of course, Pastor Arthur Pawlowski's case is live, and I'm delighted that the Democracy Fund is defending him, defending Church in the Vine, and defending other churches too. It's appalling to me that other churches are either silent or frankly against these freedom churches. I think that's really gross. I'm embarrassed that no synagogues or mosques or Sikh temples have come to the aid of these churches. You know, you've been to the Holocaust Memorial in Israel. I've been there with you. There's something called the Righteous Gentiles. They have the Garden of the Righteous Gentiles. These are Christians who protected the Jews, like Oskar Schindler being one of the most famous examples, at personal risk, like the people who hid Anne Frank. They were Gentiles. They hid Anne Frank because it was the right thing to do. They weren't Jews themselves. Where are the righteous Jews? Where are the righteous Sikhs, the righteous Muslims, the righteous Hindus? They're letting these Christians twist in the wind. Where is the solidarity? And I tell you, if you had a bunch of clergy from every faith come out and say, lay off the Christian churches, that would pack a wallop. And by the way, it would feel very good, I think, for Christians to see that kind of solidarity. I think there's a lot of shame to go around here. I think the media is the worst and the government is the worst. But I'm glad you're on the story, Sheila.
It's what you're explaining is exactly why these churches are bursting at the seams. These freedom churches are outgrowing their buildings. And it's because Christians feel abandoned by their own clergy, who should have stood up for them, should have stood up for religious freedom, and should have seen themselves as frontline workers during the pandemic, giving spiritual aid and comfort. But they never did. And that's why people were flooding to Church in the Vine. That's why Grace Life has now outgrown its building. That's why Tim Stevens is outgrowing his building. That's why Pastor Art's church is packed every single week. And it's because they were let down by their own clergy, by their own priests, that they came to the churches who stood with them. And now, hopefully, they continue to stand with those churches as they stand up to the government.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that we're doing our part by telling the story, or as our motto is, telling the other side of the story, because the government and the media party is certainly against these folks. Thanks, Sheila. Keep it up.
I will, boss. Thank you.
What you just saw was an excerpt from my nightly show, The Ezra Levant Show. Every weekday, I do a monologue. Usually it's about half an hour. Then I interview an interesting guest, and then we read my hate mail or my fan mail, whichever is more fun. It's only available behind a paywall, though. That's how we pay our bills here at Rebel News. We don't take a dime from Justin Trudeau. But the good news is it's only $8 a month, about half the price of Netflix. And in addition to my nightly show, you also get weekly shows from 4 other friends here at Rebel News. So you're getting 36 shows a month just for $8. I think it's worth it. And even if you're not quite sure, do it anyways, because we rely on viewers like you to keep us free and independent. I promise you I'll never take a dime from Trudeau. Just go to rebelnewsplus.com and click subscribe. Thanks.